right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Joe, he's Nick, and you are listening to part 3 of the Nick and Joe Show for this week. And if you missed it last week, the podcast, that's because we actually didn't post the podcast. Totally my fault, ladies and gentlemen. I was not being recalcitrant or irresponsible or anything like that. It's just that we were having significant problems last week, just before we went on live, with what's called latency. That is to say, a lot of delay in between when I would get Nick's signal because he was out in the farm, and I would get his, and he would get his, or he would get mine. And there was a lot of gap in between. And so what we tried to do is, on my end here, I tried to fix some of the settings, bit rates and buffering, etc., and I failed to check the performance before we went on the air. Now, I don't know what the quality was for those of you who were listening to the live show, but when we went back to listen to the actual recording of the show, it was pretty bad. It was terribly choppy, and it was just pretty brutal. And so we made a decision not to post the podcast last week. So that's what happened. That's the explanation. Now you are completely up to date. But that is not a problem this week. We have corrected all of the problems. We tested the heck out of everything yesterday. We didn't take a chance. Nick was very adamant about that. Thank you, Nick. And so now we're all set, and everything seems to be going tickety-boo. You know, maybe I should be careful of what I'm saying here. Anyway, if you want to join the broadcast debate live, you can do so in our chat room. Just click on the chat bubble on the player, and you may have to register if you haven't done that before, or log in. That's to ensure that you are a flesh and blood, real human being, and not a left-wing liberal robot trolling the internet looking for conservative voices to cancel. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, the world famous, the one and only Nick Vandergraat.
What am I supposed to say to that? World famous. Well, how about house famous? Anyway,
we have listeners around the world, Nick. People in Australia are listening to us as we speak. And
well,
if
that
not,
would make you world famous too.
You
know, just before we get on to, we were going to talk about Joe Biden. I got to bring this up. There's a petition to rename the Trudeau Airport. It's gathered 25,000 signatures. Okay, fine. I mean, I just find it funny that they wanted to rename. Was it Mirabel? No, the Trudeau International.
Yeah, Pierre Elliott Trudeau International Airport, which was named Pierre Elliott Trudeau International Airport from its original name, Dorval International Airport.
And he had built another one called Mirabel, and they didn't name that one after him because it was a freaking disaster. So he didn't want anything to do with it. But I find it funny. They want to call it the Jacques Parizeau International. First of all, why does a city the size of Montreal need 2 international airports? I have no idea.
Well, the Mirabel Airport is predominantly now air cargo and all that stuff. It's not so much passenger flights. Most of the passenger flights come into Pierre Elliott Trudeau, the pet airport, as we like to call it.
Oh man, if only he was just a pet. But the same, I still say they don't need 2, because look at Pearson in Toronto. Toronto's a bigger city. I'm sure they have just as much cargo handling capacity as do the 2 airports in Montreal. But they want to do it, and they've raised 25,000 signatures. Now, the funny thing about it is petitions, generally speaking, don't go anywhere. I've never seen a petition, no matter how well-intentioned, actually achieve anywhere near success. I remember the biggest one I remember was when we converted to metric, a day that will live in infamy. They brought in a petition. It was a big roll, and two guys carried it in, and there were 500,000 names on it, and people not wanting to convert from imperial, God's measurement system, to metric, the devil's metric measurement system, and they didn't want to do it. And if that won't change their mind, 25,000 isn't going to do it. But I just thought I'd throw that in the mix for some fun, because they're not going to do this. They're not going to be stopped by a petition. If they're going to rename the airport, they're going to rename it, and there's nothing anybody can do about it because they've never been able to stop anything like this before. What makes us think they're going to do it now? Now, with all that said, I just thought I'd throw that into the mix for some fun. I'm curious, Joseph, to get your perspective on the first, let's say 6 weeks of Joe Biden's presidency. He's decided it was his move to have Dr. Seuss censured and have 6 books of his removed from the National Day of Reading. He's the one who decided that was the most serious thing that day he had to deal with. And you know how evil Dr. Seuss was. We talked about that in the first hour. So he's got a problem at the southern border. There's pictures of people coming lined up at the border where they're wearing white T-shirts that say on them, "Biden let us in." And the reason I mention this is because when Trump was president, the last 2 years of his presidency, you didn't see any convoys of massive convoy waves to the border. He put a stop to it. Now, no matter what you think of Trump, he did get that done. He solved that problem. And he didn't do it by just building a wall. He dealt with it by dealing with Central American countries and helped them find ways to keep their own people at home and give them opportunities or whatever. I don't know all the details on that, but he put an end to these massive waves of humanity trying to come over the southern border. Biden has been in power for 6 weeks, and now all of a sudden these things are back because they know that Joe Biden said he's going to start letting them in. So now they're demanding he keep his election promise that tear down this wall almost. And in Texas, they had some people come through a hole in the wall. They were detained and tested, and guess what? 108 of them had COVID. So he's not only allowing people in, but he's allowing people in with medical conditions that they've been trying to stamp out. And how you accomplish those two things at the same time, I have no idea. So from my perspective, I think Joe Biden has been an utter embarrassment. And he was at a press conference here within the last couple of days, and a reporter, you want to talk about how the media treats the two different presidents differently. Trump, he was being yelled at all the time, and when he called a press conference, when he decided it was over and he turned to walk away, they were still yelling at him, still trying to get answers out of him as he walked out of the room. Even though he'd been there for 45 minutes, Joe Biden was in there for a few moments, and a reporter said to him, "Were you briefed this morning on the problem at the southern border?" His answer, "Yes, I was." He said, "What did you learn?" "I learned a lot." And he turned and walked out. And there was one reporter going, "But, Mr. President," but in other words, the contrast was unbelievable in the difference. There was no way Trump would have gotten away with just the odd little softball question thrown at him and allowed that to stand. It just wouldn't have happened. So what do you do? So I'm just curious, Joe, what you thought of his first 6 weeks in office.
Well, it won't surprise anyone, Nick, when I say that I don't like virtually any of the things that Joe Biden has done. I think he's dabbled in some areas like, the Dr. Seuss affair, that, he may himself have precipitated the whole thing. But whether he did or he didn't, I don't think that this is something that the President of the United States should weigh in on. But look at the things that he's done. He's re-entered the Paris climate change agreement. And, there are serious constitutional questions, I understand, of whether or not he can, in fact, do that through an executive order, because the country had already withdrawn from the accord, and to re-enter it probably needs Senate approval. So I'm not sure about that. Again, I don't, as I've said many times, I don't have a dog in the race. So, however they handle their constitutional issues is completely up to them. But I'm very much opposed to re-entering that accord. I think it was very bad of the United States to do that. Very unhelpful, especially if you actually believe in man-made climate change. Just as a little digression on that subject, I heard Bill Gates being interviewed by Chris Wallace on their Sunday morning news program on Fox News Network. And Chris Wallace asked Bill Gates, on the subject of global warming, you're a very big believer in man-made global warming. You want to promote steps to reduce greenhouse gases, but look at the house you live in. Look at the cars you drive. Look at how you travel around in a private jet. How do you account for all of that stuff? And Bill Gates gave an answer which I thought was extremely revealing. And it was this. He said, well, you're absolutely right. And we take it seriously. And I've dealt with that through purchasing carbon offsets, which, basically means that he's not reducing his greenhouse gas production at all. What he's doing is he's paying other people to reduce their greenhouse gas production, and if they reduce it below a certain level, then it all balances out. So essentially, what he's doing is he's demonstrating that the mega rich, the left wing mega rich, that nobody seems to want to criticize ever, are able to buy their way out of the stringent measures that the Paris Climate Accord ought to be calling for amongst everybody. They're not doing their share, and they're just saying, well, and he was quite blatant about it, Yeah, you're right, but I'm doing this, and therefore everything's okay. I'm following the rules. So, a bit of a digression, Nick, but I just couldn't help but make that observation. What else has he done? Canceled the Keystone Pipeline. He's re-engaged with Iran, and looks like somehow they're going to, the Americans are going to find a way to get back into some sort of a treaty with Iran on their nuclear program. That'll be a little bit more difficult because now he's got to deal with not just the Israelis, but Israel's Arab allies as well. And how strange does that sound? Thank you, Donald Trump, right? But Saudi Arabia, these countries, you can't. You can make Israel as much of a whipping boy as you want in the Middle East, but the fact of the matter remains that Israel and countries like Saudi Arabia are very closely aligned on national security, regional national security issues, and the Biden administration is going to have a very difficult time getting beyond that. The Chinese testing Biden already. The Russians, if they haven't tested him yet, they will soon. The North Koreans are going to test him as well. We're going to see, Nick. So far, I haven't been surprised, and therefore I haven't been particularly disappointed, no matter how much I think, he's stinking things out, as it were. But I think the next 3 to 6 months are really going to be trying for him, and we'll see. It's easy to make promises, but once you're in that big chair, it's all of a sudden you have to deal with reality, and reality when you're the president of the United States is a pretty big, serious reality.